Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've ever done, every dream chased, every victory celebrated, every failure mourned, was never truly yours. That every decision, every impulse, every craving that whispered in your mind was nothing more than a string pulled by something deeper, something older, something invisible. You call it desire, but perhaps it is desire that calls you. You open your eyes, the faint light of dawn spilling through the curtains. The room is silent, but your mind is already restless. You reach for your phone before you even breathe properly. The notifications glow like tiny lighthouses of validation, promising connection, significance, belonging. You scroll, and in each flick of your thumb lies a confession. You are searching for something you cannot name. Approval, love, power, escape. You tell yourself you are just catching up, but deep down, you feel it, that quiet, gnawing dependence. You are not the master of your attention. Your attention is the leash around your neck. Now imagine this. What if everything humanity has built, our cities, our politics, our art, even our religions, were simply monuments to desire? Every skyscraper a monument to ambition, every advertisement a hymn to envy, every war a scream of unfulfilled longing. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who cannot command himself will be commanded." And perhaps that is the cruelest truth of all, that those who fail to master their desires will always be ruled by those who do. You can see it everywhere. The billionaire who never stops chasing more, even when he owns half the world. The influencer who shapes her image until she no longer remembers her own reflection. The lover who clings to affection even when it poisons him. Desire, in all its disguises, enslaves quietly. It doesn't bind your hands, it binds your will. And when your will is not your own, freedom becomes an illusion dressed in comfort. But what is desire, really? Is it evil? No. It is the engine of life itself. Without it, we would never build, create, love, or dream. And yet, the same fire that gives warmth can also burn the house down. Nietzsche saw this duality clearly. He saw that the difference between a man who is consumed by desire and a man who commands it is the difference between a slave and a creator. Between the one who kneels before his appetites and the one who bends them into tools of transcendence. Look around you. The modern world worships desire like a god. Every screen screams, "Want this. Be this. Buy this. Become this." You are told that to desire is to live. But what if that's the greatest deception of all? What if the endless chase for more pleasure, more validation, more stimulation, is the very thing keeping you small, weak, and obedient? There's a strange paradox here. The more a man fulfills his desires, the emptier he becomes. The feast never ends, but neither does the hunger. It's as if every fulfilled craving gives birth to two more. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer called it the pendulum of human existence, forever swinging between desire and boredom. When you lack what you crave, you suffer. When you finally get it, you feel the dull ache of meaninglessness. And so the cycle begins again. But Nietzsche, the great rebel of the human spirit, refused to accept that cycle as destiny. He saw that true power lies not in denying desire, nor in indulging it, but in transcending it. To master desire, he believed, is to turn its energy into creation. The man who masters himself does not kill his impulses. He harnesses them like a sculptor molding raw chaos into form. That is what it means to become a creator of values. That is what it means to master the world. So ask yourself, when you wake each morning, who is in control? The conscious you, guided by intention and purpose, or the unseen orchestra of wants and fears pulling your strings from the shadows? What if your so-called freedom is nothing but a sophisticated form of slavery, a freedom to obey your cravings, to be predictable, consumable, controlled? Imagine, for a moment, breaking that spell. Imagine standing before every temptation, every craving, and feeling nothing but stillness, not suppression, but sovereignty. The world would bend differently around you. You would move through life not as one who reacts, but as one who creates. That is the man Nietzsche envisioned, not the one who avoids desire, but the one who transforms it into power. The question, then, is not whether you have desires, but whether your desires have you. And if they do, what would it take to reclaim your throne? You begin to suspect that the real enemy isn't out there. It isn't society, capitalism, technology, or even the people who manipulate your attention. It's something far more intimate. something that lives beneath your skin, in the shadows of your psyche. That enemy is your desire itself, not as a feeling, but as a force. A current that shapes every thought, every habit, every dream. The most dangerous prison, Nietzsche might say, is not made of walls or chains, but of cravings you mistake for freedom. Desire hides behind everything. It whispers beneath ambition, disguises itself as love, cloaks itself in purpose. It makes you believe you're choosing, when in truth, you're obeying. And the most terrifying realization of all is that this obedience feels good. You want what enslaves you. You enjoy the very thing that keeps you small. Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is the heart of the problem. Your desires, unexamined, become your destiny. The things you crave are not accidental. They are echoes of unresolved needs, ancient instincts, and cultural programming. From childhood, you are taught what to want. Approval from your parents. Acceptance from your peers. Validation from society. Slowly, your desires stop being your own. They become reflections of a collective hypnosis. You are trained to crave what others celebrate. Success, beauty, control, wealth, attention. You begin to measure your worth by the distance between who you are and who you are told to be. And in that gap, desire thrives. Schopenhauer saw this long before the modern age. To him, the will, the blind, ceaseless striving for existence, was the root of all suffering. Every being, he said, is possessed by a relentless will to live, a hunger that never rests. The moment one desire is fulfilled, another takes its place, like heads of a hydra. Humanity is trapped in this cycle, mistaking motion for meaning. But Nietzsche refused to let despair have the final word. He agreed that desire ruled mankind, but he believed it could be transformed. Where Schopenhauer saw only suffering, Nietzsche saw a chance for greatness. What is great in man, he wrote, is that he is a bridge and not an end. A bridge, between the animal that craves and the creator that commands. The hidden problem, then, is not desire itself, but our relationship to it. We are neither beasts nor gods. We live in the tension between impulse and will. Yet most men never confront this tension, they drown in it. They live as puppets of instinct, convinced they are kings. Their intellect becomes a servant to their appetite. Every invention, every ideology, every system they build becomes another mirror reflecting their hunger. Look at modern life. Everything is engineered to amplify desire while disguising dependence. Algorithms know you better than you know yourself. Corporations study the microsecond pauses in your scrolling to decode your cravings. The marketplace has become a cathedral of temptation, promising salvation through consumption. You're told, follow your passion. But whose passion is it, really? The one that was sold to you, or the one that was born in silence, when no one was watching? Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to escape the weight of freedom. Because if you admit that your desires are not your own, then you must also admit that your life, every pursuit, every goal, may have been built upon illusion. That's too much for most people to bear. It's easier to keep scrolling, to keep chasing, to keep pretending. But the man who dares to look inward begins to see the architecture of his prison. He notices how his desires are shaped by fear, the fear of being unseen, unloved, forgotten. Desire, after all, is the shadow cast by insecurity. The more fragile the ego, the louder the hunger. Nietzsche knew this intimately. He believed that weakness craves satisfaction, while strength craves creation. The weak seek pleasure to fill the void, the strong turn the void into art. So what truly drives you? Is it the joy of mastery, or the terror of emptiness? When you desire power, is it because you want to create something meaningful, or because you fear being insignificant? When you chase beauty, do you love what you behold, or do you only love how it reflects upon you? Every desire conceals a confession. And most people spend their lives never listening to what their cravings are trying to say. There's a hidden irony in this. The freer the world becomes, the less free the individual feels. We live in an age of endless choices, yet every choice feels predetermined by trends, algorithms, and invisible pressures. This abundance of freedom has not liberated us, it has fragmented us. We are lost in a labyrinth of options, each one promising fulfillment, none delivering peace. This is the psychological root of the modern condition, the tyranny of infinite desire. Viktor Frankl, a man who survived the horrors of Auschwitz, observed that man's greatest need is not pleasure, but meaning. Without meaning, pleasure becomes poison, sweet at first, deadly in time. Desire without direction consumes the soul. It keeps you busy, distracted, alive on the surface but hollow beneath. Nietzsche understood that the only cure for this emptiness was to give desire a higher form, to sublimate it, to redirect the raw, animal energy of wanting into creation, discipline, and purpose. One must still have chaos in oneself, he wrote, to give birth to a dancing star. But few ever reach that point, because the hidden problem is seductive. Desire offers an easy escape from the burden of self-mastery. Why confront your chaos when you can drown it in pleasure? Why wrestle your demons when the world hands you infinite distractions to feed them? That is why most people never awaken. They live and die as extensions of their cravings, mistaking motion for progress, stimulation for joy. They serve invisible masters, not realizing that every advertisement, every fantasy, every craving is another command whispered into their unconscious. And so the question grows sharper, darker, more urgent. If desire is the architect of your world, who is the architect of your desire? You live in a world that tells you to follow your heart, but have you ever stopped to ask who programmed your heart to want what it wants? You are told to do what makes you happy, but happiness, too, has been branded, packaged, and sold back to you at a price. Everywhere you turn, desire disguises itself as freedom, and the more you chase it, the tighter its grip becomes. There's a strange quiet that comes in the middle of the night, when the world finally stops talking. You set your phone down, stare into the darkness, and realize how restless your mind still is. It doesn't matter if you've eaten, achieved, or scrolled, something inside you still whispers, more. That whisper is not hunger. It's not ambition. It's the sound of your spirit echoing in an empty chamber it can't fill. You think you're chasing what you love, but what if what you love is simply what you've been conditioned to chase? The unseen consequence of unmastered desire is subtle but catastrophic. You begin to lose yourself. Your identity becomes a collage of cravings. You start defining who you are by what you want, and in doing so, you give up the power to ever be content. Every new desire promises to complete you, and every fulfillment reveals another void. You become like a mirror reflecting mirrors, an endless chain of wanting without an origin. In this sense, desire doesn't just enslave individuals, it builds civilizations of dependency. Modern culture is a marketplace of longing. The economy thrives on dissatisfaction. Industries exist solely to remind you that you're not enough. Your body, your career, your home, your relationship, all must be optimized, upgraded, redefined. You're not living anymore, you're performing existence. And yet, this performance feels natural because it's rewarded. Society worships the hungry man, the one who's always striving, consuming, ascending. But Nietzsche warned that this obsession with acquisition is a symptom of decay. The weak, he wrote, are those who are unable to rule themselves and therefore seek to rule others. The constant need for more is not strength, it is a confession of inner poverty. Look closer at the faces around you, in the streets, on screens, in mirrors. The anxiety, the comparison, the quiet desperation, these are not signs of progress, but of possession. A man possessed by desire no longer sees the world as it is. He sees it only in terms of what it can give him. His perception narrows, his empathy withers, his will weakens. He begins to feed on experiences instead of living them. You see it in the addict who cannot stop scrolling, in the lover who cannot stop needing, in the entrepreneur who cannot stop building even after he's already conquered. These are not different pathologies, they are different faces of the same disease, the disease of endless wanting. Cognitive science confirms what the philosophers suspected long ago: the brain is not built for satisfaction. Every time you achieve or acquire something you desire, dopamine spikes, then quickly falls. The mind adjusts, resets, demands a new stimulus. It's a feedback loop designed for survival, not happiness. What once kept your ancestors alive now keeps you restless. Desire was meant to move you, but in the modern age, it has nowhere left to go except in circles. And yet, there's something far darker beneath this endless motion. When you cannot master desire, desire becomes a tool for others to master you. Nietzsche called this the herd morality, a condition where man, unable to command himself, seeks comfort in conformity. When your desires are predictable, you are easy to lead. When you crave approval, you become obedient. When you fear exclusion, you become silent. The world doesn't need chains anymore. It has notifications. This is the hidden genius of modern power. It doesn't forbid, it seduces. You are not coerced into compliance. You choose it. You buy your own distractions. You fund your own enslavement. You build your own cage out of comfort. And every time you tell yourself, I deserve this, you add another lock. Nietzsche once wrote that modern man is domesticated, not liberated. He has exchanged the whip of the master for the gentle leash of pleasure. He no longer obeys out of fear, but out of habit. He mistakes indulgence for freedom, obedience for individuality. And yet, deep down, he feels it, that silent hollowness that no pleasure can erase. Because pleasure is not purpose. It never was. There's a tragic irony here. The more a man tries to fulfill his desires, the more he distances himself from what he truly desires: peace, mastery, meaning. Each indulgence strengthens the neural pathways of dependency. Each surrender to craving erodes the muscle of will. Over time, the mind loses the ability to sit in silence. It needs noise, stimulation, distraction. Desire becomes the new oxygen, and stillness feels like suffocation. This is why so many people crumble in solitude. Without stimulation, they meet the one thing they've been running from, themselves. In silence, all the unexamined desires rise from the depths: the hunger for love, the fear of insignificance, the shame of not being enough. They were never gone, they were merely drowned in noise. And when the noise stops, the truth speaks. That is the moment most people turn away. But the few who endure, the few who dare to listen, begin to see the machinery for what it is. They see how their every desire has been trained, their every emotion commodified. They see that their suffering is not personal, it is structural. They see that the cage is not outside them, it is them. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. You start to notice the patterns: how you crave praise after silence, how you reach for distraction when discomfort arises, how every want is really a fear in disguise. You begin to feel the quiet horror of realizing that you've spent your life feeding illusions that never fed you back. But within that horror lies something sacred, the beginning of awakening. For when you finally confront how desire has shaped you, a new question begins to form. If desire is the architect of your prison, can it also become the architect of your liberation? Nietzsche believed it could. But to transform desire, one must first rebel against it. Not by suppression, but by transmutation. The path forward is not to kill your longing, but to give it new direction, to rise from craving into creation, from consumption into command. And that rebellion begins where every revolution begins, not in the streets, but in the soul. It begins not with thunder, not with a revolution in the streets, but with a quiet act of defiance, the refusal to be ruled by your own cravings. No one will see it happen. There will be no applause, no triumph, no audience. It will happen in silence, in the raw, private confrontation between what you want and what you are. The first act of rebellion is awareness. To see your desires clearly, not as truths, but as impulses, not as gods, but as guests. Most people never reach this point. They live and die within their appetites, mistaking them for identity. But the moment you step back and observe your desires, you are no longer their prisoner. You become the witness, not the servant. That awareness, Nietzsche would say, is the birth of the sovereign individual, the one who can make a promise and keep it, who can will something and see it through. But awareness alone is not enough. You must struggle. You must learn the ancient art of wrestling with your own instincts. The Greeks called it ascesis, self-discipline not as repression, but as refinement. Like a blacksmith hammering raw iron into a blade, you must hammer your impulses until they serve you. The goal is not purity, the goal is power. To master desire, you must transform it into will. Every craving is energy. The man who wastes it in indulgence dissipates it into nothing. The man who harnesses it can move mountains. Nietzsche's Übermensch, the overman, is not a superhuman figure, but a metaphor for this transformation. He is one who has turned desire into fuel for creation. His lust becomes passion for art, His ambition becomes discipline, his pain becomes wisdom. He doesn't escape his instincts, he uses them. Ask yourself, what if you took the hunger that drives you to scroll, to compare, to consume, and redirected it toward mastery? What if the same energy that makes you crave validation could be turned into creation? That shift is not easy. It demands sacrifice, the sacrifice of comfort, of distraction, of the illusion that you can have it all without giving anything up. Because to master desire, you must deny the world's first commandment. Seek pleasure, avoid pain. Nietzsche rejected that principle as the root of mediocrity. What does not kill me makes me stronger was not bravado, it was a declaration of a deeper truth. Strength is born only through the willing embrace of struggle. To rebel against desire is to rebel against ease itself. And that's what makes this rebellion so rare. Pleasure is immediate. Mastery is slow. Pleasure demands nothing. Mastery demands your soul. The world seduces you with comfort because it knows that comfort kills the will. The more entertained you are, the less dangerous you become. But the moment you stop chasing comfort, the moment you begin to seek difficulty, silence, solitude, you become unpredictable. You become free. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of one's fate, is perhaps the most radical act of rebellion imaginable. It means to stop chasing what you want and start loving what is. Not passively, not with resignation, but with fierce affirmation. To look at every wound, every failure, every unfulfilled desire and say, this too is necessary. Imagine the strength it takes to do that, to no longer beg the universe for satisfaction, but to stand tall and say, everything I need, I already possess. That is the point where the will becomes indestructible. You cease to be at the mercy of circumstance because you no longer seek salvation from it. But this path is not one of denial. Nietzsche did not advocate asceticism in the monastic sense. He did not ask man to renounce desire entirely. That would be another form of enslavement. He asked man to redeem it, to turn even his darkest impulses into light, to love, but not cling, to desire, but not depend, to create, but not crave recognition. That balance, between passion and peace, fire and control, is the mark of true mastery. Consider the artist who pours his longing into his craft instead of his ego. The athlete who channels his aggression into discipline rather than destruction. The thinker who wrestles his confusion into clarity. Each of them has done something sacred. They have transformed their inner chaos into form. That is what Nietzsche meant by giving style to one's character. Most people drift like clay in the hands of circumstance. But the Creator shapes himself. He chooses which desires to serve and which to silence. He becomes both the sculptor and the sculpture. And make no mistake, this rebellion will cost you. You will lose things. The world does not applaud those who refuse its seductions. You will be misunderstood, mocked, even feared. Because a man who does not need what others crave cannot be controlled. His silence unsettles. His independence threatens. He exposes, without speaking, how enslaved everyone else truly is. But that loneliness, that sacred solitude, is the forge of power. Nietzsche called it the path of the mountain. The climb is brutal, the air thin, the world below fading into insignificance. Yet at the summit, a strange serenity awaits. You look down upon the valley of endless desire and see it for what it is, a playground for those still asleep. You feel no superiority, only distance, the quiet strength of one who no longer kneels. And then something beautiful happens. Once you no longer chase desire, desire itself transforms. It stops being a chain and becomes a compass. It no longer drags you outward, it draws you inward, toward the deeper self, the one that does not crave but creates. You begin to desire not pleasure, but purpose. Not escape, but expression. You no longer ask, what can I get from the world? But, what can I give to it? That is the final stage of rebellion, when mastery of desire becomes service to creation. When the will that once sought to possess now seeks to become. Nietzsche called this the yes-sayer, the one who affirms life in its totality, who no longer fights desire but uses it as a force of art. The man who reaches this state no longer needs to conquer others, because he has conquered himself. And in that conquest lies the greatest freedom of all. For centuries, men have sought to rule nations, empires, and economies. But the greatest throne a man can ever claim is the one within his own soul. The rebellion against desire is not a war against human nature, it is the birth of a higher one. It is the transformation of the beggar into the creator, the addict into the artist, the slave into the sovereign. And when a man reaches that state, he no longer seeks the world's approval. The world, instead, bends to his will. Because the man who masters his desires does not just master himself, he masters reality itself. Imagine, for a moment, standing completely still. No hunger pulling you forward, no fear dragging you back. Just silence, vast and heavy, where your desires once roared. In that stillness, something stirs. Not craving, not ambition, but clarity. You begin to see what Nietzsche saw, that the battle was never between man and the world, it was between man and himself. For all your life, you've been taught that mastery means control, power over others, over circumstances, over outcomes. But true mastery, Nietzsche realized, begins when you no longer need control at all. When you no longer need life to give you what you want, because you have become the source of what you seek. The man who masters his desires does not suppress life, he embodies it. He no longer runs from chaos, he is chaos, ordered by will. This is the final paradox. To gain everything, you must first renounce the need for anything. In the silence of self-mastery, desire doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes devotion. The man who once chased fleeting pleasures now serves a higher longing, the longing to create, to become, to give form to the infinite. His will is no longer at war with his instincts, it rides them like wind filling a sail. Pleasure, pain, success, failure, all become raw materials in the hands of his purpose. Nietzsche called this the Dionysian spirit, not the drunken ecstasy of chaos, but the divine intoxication of creation. The man who embodies it lives fully, dangerously, joyfully. He is not numb, he is alive beyond measure. But his joy no longer depends on outcomes. His joy is the act itself, the struggle, the dance, the creation. He has turned life into art. When a man reaches this state, he no longer fears loss, because nothing can be taken from him that he truly values. He no longer fears death, because he has already died to illusion. He no longer seeks meaning, because he is meaning, a living testament to the power of will. Look closely at history, and you'll see this truth written in the lives of those who transcended desire. The Buddha, who walked away from pleasure and found peace not in denial, but in awakening. The Stoics, who taught that mastery of emotion is the mastery of fortune. The artists, the philosophers, the warriors, all who refused to be ruled by craving became rulers of reality itself. Not because the world bowed to them, but because they no longer bowed to the world. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "Become who you are." Not who you wish to be, not who others expect you to be, but the being you were meant to sculpt from your chaos. Most people spend their lives fleeing themselves, chasing pleasure to avoid pain, chasing distraction to avoid truth. But the man who has faced himself, stripped of illusion, stands untouchable. He no longer lives for desire, he lives from will. And that changes everything. To master desire is to see through the mirage of duality, the endless war between wanting and resisting, gaining and losing, loving and fearing. When you stop clinging to one and running from the other, you realize they are not opposites, they are parts of the same whole. Pleasure and pain, triumph and failure, they all belong to life. To reject one is to reject both. This realization births what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, the man beyond man, the one who has reconciled with the totality of existence. He doesn't seek to escape suffering, he transforms it. He doesn't deny his nature, he elevates it. His life becomes a statement, his every action a piece of philosophy carved into time. He is no longer a product of the world becomes a product of him. That is why Nietzsche said, "He who masters himself, masters the world." Because the world is not something external, it is the mirror of your mind. If your desires control you, the world appears hostile, chaotic, unjust. But if you control your desires, the same world becomes clay in your hands. You begin to move with life instead of against it. You no longer need to conquer, your mere being is conquest. Yet this mastery cannot be faked. You cannot trick desire by pretending to be detached. True detachment is not coldness, it is fullness. It is when your cup overflows so completely that the world can neither add to you nor take from you. It is when you no longer need validation, because your existence itself is validation enough. When you reach that point, the old desires dissolve, not because they are denied, but because they are fulfilled in a higher form. The need for power becomes the will to create. The need for pleasure becomes the joy of becoming. The need for love becomes love itself, not as possession, but as radiance. And then, the entire universe seems to shift. The same life that once oppressed you now dances to your rhythm. You realize it was never the world that needed to change, it was your relationship to it. Desire distorted your vision, made you see life as something to acquire. But when you transcend desire, life reveals itself as something to express. That is the final freedom, the freedom to simply be. Nietzsche once wrote, "The secret of joy lies not in possessing, but in overcoming." To overcome is not to destroy, but to rise above. It is to look at your desires, your lust, your envy, your hunger, and say, "I see you, but I am not you." It is to turn every temptation into a test, every craving into a question. Do I serve this, or does this serve me? The man who can answer that truthfully no longer fears the storms of existence. He sails through them, not because the seas have calmed, but because he has learned to steer. So, imagine it again, that morning where you awaken not into noise, but into stillness. The phone is silent. The world waits. And for the first time, you do not reach for anything. You simply breathe. There is no hunger, no lack, no chase, only presence. The air feels heavier, more real, as if reality itself has shifted its weight onto your shoulders. And then, quietly, you smile. Because you understand. The world has not changed. You have. Desire still moves around you. Advertisements still scream, temptations still whisper, the world still burns with hunger, but none of it reaches you. You are no longer part of the storm. You are the mountain it crashes against. You are not numb, you are awake. And in that awakening lies the power that men have sought for centuries. Not dominion over others, but dominion over the self. That is why the man who masters his desires masters the world. Because he no longer needs to own anything to possess everything. He lives not as a slave to longing, but as a sculptor of existence. He does not follow his desires follow him. And in the echo of that truth, the noise of the world fades, leaving only the sound of quiet strength, of will refined into wisdom, of life lived as art. The man who masters his desires does not escape humanity. He fulfills it.